Hello. Hello, hello. We're going to go ahead and get started. So we, as always, have a jam-packed agenda. I think I've met everyone. Well, I now know I haven't met everyone, but for those who don't know me, my name is Glenna, and I'm with G4 Strategies, and I'm delighted to be here. And Tasha, who you are very familiar with, she and I have been tag teaming, and I get to, she sort of queued you up to this point, and I get to bring you home. She left me with the hard work, which is to get y'all to alignment on a set of recommendations, but I really am thrilled to be here. And I was actually supposed to be here last month. The day I was supposed to be here, I had a fall, and I broke 2 ribs. So I'm still recovering, so every once in a while, you'll hear me take a big, deep breath, and that's just so I can, breathe, I guess. But I'm really grateful for Tasha for stepping in. So tonight, I'm super excited. We've spent, this is our 9th meeting, and we've spent 8 sessions. The first part of the session was sort of the table setting, the foundation, and then we spent some time co-creating, you all co-created your strategic vision. And then we've been doing all of this sort of knowledge sharing. And I can't think of a better person to sort of complete this phase of the work that we're doing than Peter. I've had just an opportunity to be on one call with him. And that one call, I was like, oh yes, he's just perfect to finish up the deepening understanding. And I'm so delighted to have Peter here. So I always think it's super important before we begin this work. It's why you all, I keep saying we, I wasn't here, but you all worked hard to get to the articulation of a strategic vision. So before I do that, I forget that I have this wonderful thing. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to just ground us in your strategic vision. We're going to have an opportunity to go back to July and do just some quick reflections from, if you can place yourself back a whole month ago, just some quick reflections on some of the sort of insights perhaps that you've had since July. And then we'll hear from Peter. Peter will be with us for an hour. Peter is the CEO of Maker Housing Partners. And then we're going to have an opportunity, as you have been doing, to do some breakout work so you can have some discussion to kind of really think about how might we apply that. And then, of course, we'll close and do I like, I wish, I wonder. At the end of this meeting, I'm gonna, I've had a couple of folks ask, like, how are we going to get to consensus on a set of recommendations? And that is a good question. And I'm not quite sure right now as your facilitator, but I promise you, we will get you there. But we really needed to make sure that sort of knowledge was shared so that there's some level setting for folks, as you all are at different sort of places in this work. And so we wanted to make certain that we were able to give you as much as we possibly could. And then we'll have a full September, October, November, December, 4 sessions to get you there. And we will get you there. So, your strategic vision to ensure equitable access to affordable and diverse housing options for all residents of Inglewood, including seniors, low-income individuals, homebuyers, renters, and future generations, with a focus on those struggling to afford housing costs. Our goal is to create a sustainable housing ecosystem that fosters stability, encourages community investment, and contributes to the overall well-being of our diverse community. That's our North Star. That's going to guide all of the knowledge that you've had. And this North Star is where we're going to start when we begin to formulate those recommendations. Well, that was poorly. I did this slide, and I'm just now seeing the error, which is why you should always have someone take a look at your slides beforehand. But I'm curious if you could place yourself back to July, and just for on your own for a second, individually, just kind of think about what are some insights or reflections or maybe some questions that you've had since that presentation. So I'll give you just a couple of minutes. Does anyone remember what the or doesn't remember what the presentation was? It was on partnerships, yeah? It was on partnerships. So we had, I had intended to pull it up, but I'm not getting internet service. So, and unfortunately, I wasn't here during that session, but I do know it was on partnerships. You had 3 presenters, I think? Yeah, I'm on. I think that might be the issue. Please.
I was just going to give a reflection and jog some memory. We had the individual, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, we're talking about the allocation of Prop 123 funding to municipalities. And I think the reflection is how little funding there is for how many project requests there are. Inglewood was one of the cities that got denied. And a takeaway that I hope we take from this is how can we market ourselves to partners? Also, we had a development partner here. How can we make Inglewood seem more desirable for partners who want to build affordable developments in our community, as well as our state partners for funding? And that's something that I think we can improve on.
So how do you position Inglewood so people are actually really desiring to partner with the city? Please, Sophia.
I think the presentations really kind of crystallized for me just how many people, how many different parties a lot of times have to come together and work together to, make a development or make an impact in affordable housing. That we have, federal, state tax credits. We have, just so many different players, nonprofits, developers, and just how to, involve everybody to make things happen. I think that really kind of showed more of the ecosystem, but it's very complex.
So complex ecosystem, and how it is that you are ensuring that you're utilizing all of those different players. Yeah, thank you. Who else? Reflections, questions?
I remember discussing, like, even at the city level where there's like a community development arm of the city level, like how is there a part of that that focuses specifically on understanding the complexities that come to Prop 123 funding or CHAFA funding and all the various programs that could be available that can more or less help be a liaison to thread the needle between public, private, that makes it easier and more attractive, because it is a difficult process to navigate through, and it takes a select type of individual to be able to take the time and effort to get through that process.
So how is it that you navigate a very complex and you tap into existing resources? Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, reflections? Peter, you're going to have a good, healthy time. You're going to have a lot of time. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Peter, and we're going to do a quick handoff here. I'll turn it.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, all right, great. All right, well, first off, thank you for inviting me into your house today to talk with you. I know that you've been doing a lot of work, and I get to parachute in right at the end. But it is an extreme honor, and there are many others that you could have asked to come share with you, so it means a lot that you asked me. And so, calling this Pathways to Housing Abundance, notes from the field. I was actually just at a community meeting on Monday night, experiencing what it means to build homes in our great country of America and in the state of Colorado. We could talk a little bit about that, but ultimately, a little bit more about me. Like Lindsay, it's my honor and privilege to serve as the Chief Executive Officer of Maker Housing Partners. We are the public housing authority for Adams County. This is our 50th anniversary. We have just over 22 or 2,100 units that we own and operate. We are a owner, developer, and manager, right? So we develop our own housing. We have about 109 employees. We consider ourselves an anchor institution. You can see there, we serve just over 5,000 residents. We're a high-performing agency. And administer just under 24 million in voucher proceeds, engaging with 3,500 household members and just over 400 individual landlords. We couldn't operate without a robust landlord participation, and we're very appreciative of that. I also, as I try to make sense of all the chaos and figure out how to get from micro to macro, and share what I experience with my feet on the good Coloradan earth. I've also been a fellow at a free market, nonpartisan think tank called the Common Sense Institute. And I've written a few things over the last couple of years. The most recently, we looked into Colorado Springs housing affordability. Did a lot of work on construction defects last session. And was very appreciative to be able to help move the conversation into a place where I think we might see some reform in the coming years. Corey, nice to see you again. I know you. Corey's amazing. And also, some other affordability reports talked about housing as a matter of statewide concern and how that interfaces with local governance. As well as wrote a report back in 2021 with my dear friend and co-fellow Evelyn Lim, the former HUD regional administrator during the 45th administration, that we made about 5 main recommendations in that report. 4 of them are now laws, which we're pretty proud of. One of which we were told we were insane, which was that it doesn't matter how much money you throw at a problem, but if you allow the limitation of growth, that it scuttles all of our investments, and it has deleterious impacts on our tax base and the ability for us to thrive. And so that was passed into law 2 sessions ago by Representative Lindstedt up in Broomfield. Pretty proud of that. Also, a lot of investments in innovation, a lot of investments in off-site manufacturing that we recommended. We introduced the idea of bringing OEdit into the housing fold to try to get closer to the speed of the street, because we struggle in government when it comes to keeping up to the pace of the market, and we know that the market drives just about everything that we do. And so those are a little bit of what I've written and why I'm here today. But first off, you know, if you could indulge me, and I think we have a little bit of time, but you know, for me, it's not just about bricks and sticks. It's about the heartbeats that turn these units into homes. You know, at the end of the day, we all have a housing story. We all have a housing journey. Some of us, it's a journey of love and safety, and you know, your nana's frying eggplant, which is my story as a second-generation Italian American. But for some of us, it's a story of struggle. It's a story of eviction. It's a story of displacement. It's a story of worrying whether or not you and your loved ones will be safe. And so if you could, maybe just close your eyes with me, take a minute and think about, you know, what does it evoke? What does your housing story say? And how does it make you feel? And if you feel comfortable, turn to your neighbor and maybe share a little bit about that, because I think it tells a lot about who we are, and it helps bridges the divides of what can be often really just a brutal policy discussion. And housing policy is not logic. Housing policy is built on fear. Fear of displacement, fear of the unknown, fear of poverty, fear of losing your nest egg. And so if you could just kind of go inward for a little bit, think about that, maybe turn to your neighbor. Will take 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'll share kind of a bit about mine. And if anybody feels like sharing a little bit about yours, it would be very honoring. And so let's do that. Lindsay, I could chat with you if you want. All right, everybody. Well, I can already sense an energy. It always warms the room up. You know, I've heard there's a saying that like the most beautiful word in the English language to you is your name. I think like the second most is like your reflections on home. And so I appreciate when folks give me the opportunity to engage in this and how it makes you feel. I think Corey and I might have done this together at a conference a year or so back. But I'll just share, you know, for me, as I mentioned, I'm a second generation Italian American. My grandparents came over to Little Italy in the early 1900s, just abject poverty. But my grandmother was a brilliant, hard-nosed Sicilian who was a gifted seamstress and started her own dress shop. And throughout the Depression, folks still fell in love and they get married, and she did okay. And my grandfather, who had just come over from Sicily as well, was dealing with a very abusive father, just a terrible alcoholic. And so he was intermittently homeless, sleeping in Central Park. My grandfather did not graduate. Neither of my grandparents graduated from even high school. But my grandfather was able to get a job with Nabisco, who had a contract to feed the troops during the war. And so they put together a little bit of money and bought a home in the country, which is Astoria, Queens. And so if anybody knows New York, that's not really the country anymore, right? But, and I didn't realize this. I started in national security. I was a civilian contractor working with a bunch of three-letter agencies, doing with folks that work with top secret information. That's how I came out here. But when I transitioned after I got my MBA, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Rothstein. If anyone's read The Color of Law, which is a wonderful book. I recommend you read it if you haven't. It will emotionally grab you. It's not an easy read. I think it's an important read, as all history is. But I got to meet Dr. Rothstein, and after I read his book, I just kind of broke down because I realized that actually that story is my story as well. And so my grandparents got an FHA insured loan, and they were able to buy that starter home. And if I was Black, if I was Hispanic, we would never have been lent that money to be able to buy that home. And why does that matter? It matters because I wouldn't be here with you today if that hadn't have happened. Because fast forward to third grade Peter in the mid 80s, my mother is an emergency room nurse, really keeping the ship afloat. My dad deals with manic depression, wonderful, brilliant musician, in and out of work. And we almost lost our house, our little starter home in Bayshore. And what did we do? We sold grandma's home. And we took that equity and put it to staving off the bank from foreclosing on our home. And so I never realized that. And what I was doing at that point, I was kind of sneaking up. I wasn't supposed to be awake. But as is my wont, I was kind of listening in from the top of the stairs, and it scared the hell out of me because I grew up at that point. I stopped asking for things. I tried to be the man of the house, stopped playing baseball, other sports, stopped asking for things because we were in trouble. And all these years later, it came flooding back, and I realized that's why I'm in housing, right? And I want to give that opportunity to be able to weather the storm of our great American experience, right? Our economy, there will be ups, there will be downs. And, you know, frankly, I'm not saying that everyone needs to have ownership of a home, but the reality is that the average homeowner in America has a equity stake of over $300,000 as of last year, and renters have less than 20. And low-income renters have significantly less than that. And so it's really difficult to be able to accomplish your own version of the American dream when you don't have the sturdy foundation of a home, when you don't have that loving place, as Lindsay shared with me, that when the world gets tough, it's your cocoon. It's where you go to with your things and your stuff, to quote the great late George Carlin, and you feel as if the world will be okay when you leave your door the next day. And we know it's really difficult for the youngsters in our community to be able to compete in school when they have a hungry belly and they're couch surfing, McKinney-Vento level homelessness, or they're in a tent or in their car with their family. And so when we talk about housing, we like to muck it all up, right? They say in my level, that's affordable, that's middle, that's market. It really is a continuum, and it is simply a structure that we are working as stewards of public good to promulgate a market environment. Some of us in this room, I know, develop housing. Others, many, set the regulatory framework to let others, as you mentioned earlier, the partnerships, be able to have an environment where they can compete to deliver a product that is at the price points that meet the needs of, as your mission statement said, all Englewood residents. And so thank you for that. I also, I think it's really weird, like we're all about, like, how do we get more proficient, right? How are we going to hack this process? Every business, how many of us everybody works at a business, or the city has core values, right? Your business has core values. We have no core values when it comes to housing. Core values help navigate us and weigh our trade-offs that we ultimately have to make. We can't have all the cake and eat it too, right? We have to make strategic trade-offs, and the way that we make those trade-offs is generally driven by our ethics and our values, right, and our beliefs, and those then manifest into behaviors. One of the most impactful things I ever was taught was, and values really mean nothing, absolutely nothing, unless you manifest them into behaviors and you teach individuals how to bring those behaviors to life, because otherwise, I'll give you an example. So there was a company, thankfully no longer in existence, that almost bankrupted the entire economy a couple decades back. And as you walked into their palatial palace, which was built on greed and exploitation and fraud, there was a massive marble cornerstone in the lobby, and it said one word, it said integrity. And every day, the C-suite of that organization would walk by that cornerstone, go up to their office and do the exact opposite. Who thinks they know what company that was? Enron, that's right, that's right. And so we don't really have values with housing. And so is it any surprise that we really don't have a true north or a compass to help us make these difficult trade-offs? And so I hope this sparks some debate, and I'm sure some of these things might trigger you, but at the end of the day, I hope it'll allow us to see where we are. I write for a free market kind of conservative think tank. I'm not necessarily a progressive, but I'm a moderate Democrat, and when I go in there, I have to bring evidence, I have to bring receipts. It's not a groupthink exercise where I can just be like, inclusionary housing, and everyone's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's tax those terrible developers. Affordable housing or nothing, right? Like, no, like we actually have to debate. We actually have to present facts and arguments and defend them. And then, imagine this, the root word of politics in Greece is essentially meeting in the middle, right? Now, many in this room understand what that means, and you understand how difficult it is, and I sympathize and I empathize and I admire you for that. And so I believe that housing is not a negative externality. As such, I believe that housing abundance drives housing affordability. The reason we're in this predicament is that we've become anemic to promulgating environments that allow for housing abundance to thrive. We blame one type of housing for causing another type of housing to be less affordable when scarcity drives the pricing of said asset, right? And so housing is a continuum. If we have a gap in affordable housing, if we have a gap in middle income housing, if we have a gap in market rate housing, it impacts all housing types unless you are in the upper quintile and money is no issue for you. And that is some of our community members, and they are valued community members, but they are not the majority of our community members, and that's how things have gotten so bad, and I'll show you a stat later. Home builders are not the enemy, right? So if we treat housing as a negative externality, what are we signaling to one another and others? We're signaling that one type of housing is bad, and we should tax that housing to pay for affordable housing, and then we act surprised when both types of housing raises its price because they are a scarce commodity, right? Supply and demand. Some people do not believe that filtering is real, and in that option, right, with abundance, there starts to become moderation of prices. But I'll tell you, Austin, Texas, and Minneapolis have something to say about that, right? They've built a ton of homes, and year-over-year rent prices are down, right? And so as we build more abundance, housing prices moderate, and greater opportunities for affordability occur as people move through the continuum. The market will not produce homes at 60% of AMI or less, really 50% of AMI or less. A lot of markets, 60%, 70% of area median income is essentially what we used to call market rate housing or entry-level housing, middle-class housing. But now we have such an acute lack of housing that it really is impossible. And you guys have had, Heidi Aguilar and the root policy team, you've had experts, people have come in here. You guys have done such great work. You have such amazing evidence for you to base your trade-offs and recommendations when you get to that point. I've been really impressed. I was impressed by your housing needs analysis, impressed by this process, impressed what Chelsea and others, you guys went through the last couple of years. You've been really doing the hard work and got some scars to prove it, but you know what? Good things are hard. And I admire what you've been doing so far. But along those lines, if you put all of your chips in the inclusionary housing bucket, I'm here to tell you, it ain't gonna work. Ain't working for Denver. Denver's asking for, and I'm not against taxation measures. I'm all for it. If you wanna ask your constituents, do they wanna tax themselves to invest in housing? I think that is, I'm all right, that's wonderful. I do have a problem though when we tax our residents and then we continue to constrain where we allow greater housing density through zone capacity, which happens to be the most affordable types of new product to be introduced. Some people might call that gaslighting. I'll let you guys think about that. And then, of course, folks are going to look at rent control as a safe harbor. It's the closest that you can grab, right? If you say, hey, wait 5 years, wait 10 years till we have more units come online, but I'm homeless now. I'm on the verge of homelessness. My child can't afford to live anywhere near me. I'm scared. Maybe rent control makes sense, but rent control through every empirical, peer-reviewed research demonstrates that it causes all, unless you're one of the lucky ones that gets into the public, to a rent-controlled asset, which, by the way, you generally never tend to leave, and we know that's not how our employment market works, right? And so you're kind of like trapped in that location, and everyone else around you's housing prices go up. Oh, and then, by the way, you can't pay for the capital needs of the rent-controlled assets, so it starts to deteriorate. And then we have public housing of years past, which we divested from, and now we blame and shame, right? And so if we continue in a market-based real estate delivery value chain, rent control will not get us where we need to go. And so, if anybody wants to tell me I'm full of it, please, I would love that. And if anyone thinks like, heck yeah, I see some heads nodding, but I think this is important because whenever I throw this slide up, it kind of like gets people a little uncomfortable, right? And that's really by design, because this is uncomfortable work. Okay. How are we doing on time? Yeah, Chelsea.
I was just going to say, I think, that first one, housing is not a negative externality. It depends, and you framed this conversation earlier around the words public good. And there's a question around, is that true when we're talking about the public? And I think if you're thinking about my own negative or positive experience as an individual, it won't feel true. Sometimes I think more housing, if you're thinking in your own individual, maybe there's more people living in the lot next to you and that you perceive as a negative thing. Yeah. And so I'd love for you to talk, when you're talking about these housing values, are these community values or these individual values, or do you see them as both?
I see that. So in business school, right, they teach you about like a business life cycle, so like you're at like, you're a new startup, and then you're at like maturity, and then you're in decline. And we kind of treat housing the same way, right? So if you're a young city, you're rolling out the red carpet for roofs, because roofs attract businesses, that drives your tax base, you're able to pay for all the vital infrastructure needs. Cities in deep negative migration where they're losing population, and Detroit just kind of turned this around because people are moving there because it's so dang affordable, but Mississippi, areas in Jackson, Mississippi, where there's just such divestment that your water is contaminated with lead and your sewage is backing up into people's yards. And so young cities are super bullish. They are like YIMBYs, right? Like you have to be able to, and in rural counties and rural cities in Colorado, they're the same way. They're like, we'll do anything, but nobody's coming, right? And so then mature cities are like, whoa, wait a minute. This housing is bad. I don't know. And then once you tip over, and Colorado's in this space right now. I mean, we were netting in, I'll show you in the next slide, for decades, 77,000 people a year. If it wasn't for, refugees, migrants, however you want to call it, right? Like we would have had negative net migration last year. I mean, it was like less than 19,000. We import all of our talent into this state, right? Like our jobs, like our fiscal security is predicated on being a growth state. And so where I'm saying to this is that if none of us have homes, and right now we kind of treat housing as if it's a coal factory, if it's a nuclear power plant, right? Like profit margin, again, you look in business school, it's like businesses will maximize their profit regardless of its impact on its surrounding community, unless local governments put constraints around them, and this is why I'm not a conservative, right? When I'm asked, I'm more of like an FDR, free market reformer, is that, yeah, I do believe that businesses need to have a loving constraint mechanism around them, right? Because you can get out of control with that, And so we treat housing as if it's creating a negative product that we then need to over-regulate, right? It takes longer for us to build the same product that we build now, and I'll show this later. So for me, it is squarely a public good for your community, because without it, you really start to realize you might not have one for much longer. Thank you, Chelsea. Okay, any others? All right. That doesn't mean that developers don't need some guardrails as well. We want to make sure that the quality of life is there. We want to make sure that we have all the service. We have to pay for them. Although we taxed ourselves back during the Greatest Generation to pay for all the infrastructure needs that our brave men and women who are coming back from the great theater of World War II. We paid for them because we viewed housing as a public good, right? And so we can discuss that, right? It's really difficult now, but the reality is when we got really serious, and the last time we had a homelessness challenge and a housing unaffordability challenge like we have today, which is actually worse than today, was coming out of the Great War. We had a tent city on the National Mall. We had 10 cities in Seattle, right? It was terrible, really bad. And we created many of the mechanisms and bureaucracies and investments that we still use today, right? GI Bill, which also, housing, which then turned into HUD. And so, I think, when we look at something, and we treat national security this way, coming from national security, budget's no issue when it comes to national security. And you'll see on my last slide, housing and housing affordability, housing stability is national security, in my opinion. And the lack thereof is the lack thereof. Okay. Again, I was kind of giving previews here, but for years, we averaged over 77,000 new heartbeats into this state. For good reason. The state's amazing. Freaking Colorado, it's amazing. We have a diverse economy. We have bountiful opportunities to drive an amazing lifestyle. We have welcoming people. If you come to Colorado and you have an idea and you're charitable and you care about other people and you're altruistic, you can do amazing things. That's not always the case in some other states where things are more constrained by patriarchy. Where'd you go to school? What's your last name? That's not Colorado. Colorado is an area of boundless opportunity. And people came here because although it's always been marginally more expensive than mid-tier cities and mid-tier states, it was still affordable for folks to be able to come and make their lives and create the life that they love to live. And so we, didn't build any homes. We didn't build any homes, at all, right? We got away with it for a while because our population was down, and then COVID hit, and everybody hit the Zoom life, and everybody's like, oh, I'm coming out to Colorado, it's gonna be amazing. And it caught up with us. Second home boom, right? The short-term rental dynamics went crazy. And so And then all through this, and this isn't Colorado's fault per se, but we are so darn inefficient. And no one wants to talk about it. One of the reasons we don't talk about it is because we don't treat housing development like we treat any other endeavor in our society. We are actually less efficient now than we were when our grandparents were in rooms like this. It costs more to develop the same product per square foot than it did, and it takes us longer to approve it. You know, the Boulder Code back in the 60s was like 16 pages for homes. It's over 2,000 now. Same type of product, essentially. You can close your eyes on Hugo's job sites or Corey's job sites or mine, and basically open them back up and be in 1978. Right? And this isn't because we don't have innovation. We have a lot of innovation. It's just pent up. Right? And the other thing is you can see the numbers there. We do not have a free market when it comes to housing development. This is really hard to hear, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it. And again, disagree with me if you like, but imagine if we brought the #1 selling vehicle in the United States to market the way that we bring housing to market. The #1 selling vehicle in the United States last year was what? Does anybody know? I bet one of you in this room drive it. Oh, close. No, it's a much bigger and brawny and American vehicle, F-150. Beautiful truck. F-150s are boss, man. That was so cool. I don't have one, but they're cool, right? So the average price last year for an F-150 off the lot, anyone want to take a guess? 60, right? 59 change. I say this because we've modernized car building, right? We still build some cars by hand. They cost the price of a house in Boulder, right? They're a Bentley, they're a Rolls Royce. Those cars are built by hand. But every other car we've modernized through robotics. The way we bring the F-150 to market is on essentially 2 production lines. One has California emissions, which we adopt. The other is not. All the other trims, you want a Raptor, that's just what we call in development lipstick on a pig, right? Imagine if we had to bring the F-150 to market the way we bring houses. We'd have 1 production line for each state. We'd have another production line for each 300 and some odd counties we have in this state. We'd have another production line for the couple hundred local government cities, municipalities we have. Could Ford bring that product to market? So, is it a surprise to everyone in this room that over 60% of all the homes built in America are built by the same 10 companies? Highly capitalized, wonderful builders, the Lennars, the D.R. Hortons, the KB Homes, they can handle the opportunity costs of moving from one jurisdiction to the next, right? It's very difficult to be able to harness the power of economies of scale and bring per unit costs down when each jurisdiction is unique to itself. You ask the best planners in a country, Nolan Gray wrote a great book, right? You guys might have seen that maybe in a reference list about, Nolan's famous for, just abolishing zoning, which, yeah, you can love him, you can hate him, but, he's he's been a planner in a small town, he's been a planner in a midtown, he's been a planner in LA. He's like, look, if I come in and somebody asks me to consult with them, it takes me 6 months to a year to get up to their code, right? So every time I developed a award-winning building in Thornton for seniors, basically LEED certified. I just didn't want to pay for it because who cares? But I can only build 25 to 30% of that building right across the street in Westminster, right? So, again, let's have some moderate, deviations in design standards so that everything doesn't look the same. But I challenge you guys to go out in Colorado now and tell me that you don't see the same Colorado mountain chic, the same Colorado suburban chic, the same Colorado urban chic, right? Now you might say, okay, we don't want slot homes. That's fine. You can not have slot homes. But generally, when you're in the market, you can't produce a product that's an ugly baby that nobody wants. That's called segue, right? And so the market's going to demand that you bring a product that is desirable to your clientele, right? And so I challenge this group to think about, as you go through your recommendations, as to, and one of the things you could do is you could rack and stack all of your PUD requests and see the most common variance requests. Those are the things you need to change in your code, right? Because if each and every time you're changing the same ordinance, why are you requiring the lengthy, costly PUD process when you could codify that by right? Oh, you didn't say that word, Peter. Right? And so I just think about this, and because we are so inefficient, every type of housing is at its max cost. And one of the ways that we have modernized, and Walmart, bless them, is the leader in this, is that we get to economies of scale to per unit cost down. We say, oh my God, it costs 400 and change to build one unit up the road in Denver, which is basically where it's at right now. But then we don't say to ourselves, well, how do we get that per unit cost down? We say, how do we pay for more of those units? And so I'm going to challenge this group as you think through these and you look at all of the expert opinions that have been presented to you and you weigh those trade-offs, you think about how can we get more efficient in delivering these units to meet the price points? Because the price points that you guys need on the low end, it ain't going to be subsidy alone that gets you there. It's going to have to be efficiency and greater opportunity in the difficult area, and we talk about it later, which needn't be so scary, and I'll give you a little, we'll get there now. Progress is a dance, and Chairman Powell is the DJ, and they are turning the music up, y'all. They just talked today that they're signaling rate reductions in September, right? So, thank goodness. But you know, what's been going on is that did we miss the era of cheap money, right? So we just went through an unprecedented period where basically money was free, right? Like you could do a lot to developers, home builders, and they could still get to the finish line. It's almost impossible now. That's why folks like Corey and myself and others who develop affordable housing, we're basically like the majority of all the starts right now. That in the upper quintile, because money's expensive, and you can park your money in a risk-free rate treasury bill and be able to get back a wonderful return just by doing nothing. And so that money that used to be flowing into housing because it was a bonanza, we didn't have enough homes, right? We were gouging prices during COVID, and the money was flowing in. And then the minute that stopped, once Chairman Powell said, music's off, y'all, housing's perplexing. That's what he said. Oh, housing's perplexing. Like, really, dude? Yeah, it is. So a little bit of good news is that we might have a couple of rate reductions over the next fiscal year. The first one starting in September, and the 10-year note is under 4 now, which is nice. And so we should start to see a return of greater feasibility for those projects that I'm sure are embargoed in your application pipeline that would pencil in a kind of 5% interest rate construction loan environment that have not been penciling for the last 18 or so months for you. That's good. But if you're a fan of entry-level home ownership, unfortunately, I am not the bearer of good news. Condos are extinct unless you're in Cherry Creek and you're providing an upper quintile product because A, you can carry the casualty insurance, and B, your clientele will pay enough that your required rate of return is enough to be able to handle the inevitable suits that are coming. And so we're working on this, though. Representative Byrd and Senator Zenzinger, she's now termed out, but Representative Byrd from Westminster, chair of the JBC, is committed to going back and trying that again. I think this room probably knows a little bit about the condo story. It passed the Condo Reflect Right to Remedy. Was the main element of the bill, SB 109. It got 2/3 of the Senate, and it couldn't even get a vote in committee in the House because progressive Dems are skeptical, we'll put it that way. So, but we need to do that, right? You know, I mean, we used to, right now, for every 14 apartments, we're delivering 1.25 condos. Back before, just up until 2008, 2009, it was more balanced. It was about 2.25 apartments for every one condo. Some folks would, and folks that disagree with me on this, and I respect their opinion, but I disagree with them, is that, you know, this is just a profit grab. Like, folks are just building rentals because they're the most profitable. But that negates the understanding that, you know, folks like Salt Lake City are building more condos. And we're seeing an opportunity that if we can bring down, and what I was able to share was some insurance cost spreads, and it's about 233% more expensive to insure a condo in Colorado, the development, same product type as a rental, than it is to deliver a rental. And so folks have left that sector, but they want to go back, right? Home builders that sell homes do not like building rentals, and they want to go back to that. And so we got to keep working on that because it's that entry level in, and if we can get folks into the ability to increase their equity, then they can have greater housing stability amongst the inevitable storm, as I mentioned earlier. And so, are we doing on time? So, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I think the words housing abundance, which is starting to gain a little bit more steam, is really a term I think that I'd like to see more of. When we look at what you guys need, and you have all the data, and that's what I was kind of like, I don't want to crush you with all the data you've already heard, but, essentially, you need deeply affordable and middle income housing, right? You're not unique in that regard, but it is a challenge. And currently, and this is political kryptonite, and Mayor Art up in Fort Collins knows all about this, as does a number of other mayors and governors and city councils across the country. But right now, 23% of land zoned, only 23% of your residentially zoned land allows for 4 or more dwelling units. 62% of that land is zoned for single family only. I get it, this is difficult, right? People get recalled, people get litigated, people get threatened, like physically. But the reality is that if you want to get to that lower number and the middle income number, the path towards that housing abundance is squarely within that zoned capacity that is constrained currently. Now, I'm not here to tell you you're doing it wrong. I'm not here to tell you you're doing it right. All I'm here to tell you is that if you want to get the deeply affordable, and you want to tap into the market to be able to do that, because as you mentioned earlier, subsidy is scarce, and the subsidy that is available is highly competitive. You got to let the market help you here, right? And what we've seen in Minneapolis, what we've seen in Portland, Oregon, what we've seen in Portland, Maine, what we've seen in Spokane, red and blue governed localities, is that if you allow for 4 units where there only used to be 1, over time, you start to see that middle attainable product come in, which then people move out of their overhoused environment into those units. And those changes benefit your deeply affordable housing providers equally, right? Because the only difference between an affordable developer and a market rate developer is our capital stack. Once we get into the entitlement process, we're on the same dance floor, right? And so if you can tackle that, and I know it's hard, and I sympathize with single family homeowners because they're comfortable with what they have, at the end of the day, that's the area that you're going to make the most hay. It's more than a math problem, but at the end of the day, I think what's going on is that we just simply do not have the zone capacity to be able to introduce that product that the market and affordable folks can deliver at the price points as identified in your housing needs analysis. I jumped the gun there. I just don't think light touch density need to be so scary. I mean, it's easy to say when you're not in the trenches, but I am in the trenches with you in Adams County and other localities. But once these places are built, it's interesting to me, like history helps make sense of the insanity, because we tend to repeat things because it's not that long ago, even a couple, 100 years. But like, if you look at the New York Times after like the brownstones were built in Brooklyn, they were calling them clap traps and disgusting. These are the most, venerated buildings in America, right? There's people, complaining about the painted ladies in San Francisco. It's like, we're just creatures of habit, and we don't like what we don't like, and we like to say that things are ugly or it's out of place. But at the end of the day, new housing is also far more safe and efficient, right? And anyone who owns a really old house knows that you love it, but what is it? It's about 10% of your overall home value you have to pay for capital needs each year. It's closer to 30% of an old home. And so, Japan, driven by disaster and an absolute need to stave off the inevitable earthquake, Japan essentially cycles through housing every 20 years, right? And it's become culturally accepted in that. We have a completely different cultural lexicon, and that cultural lexicon has led us to where we are today. So, are you built out? Depends on who you ask, right? This is hard. This is hard, but there's a reason you guys asked me to come last. So at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, it's like, okay, like how we get there. And I think there's a tool that the Europeans use, because there's NIMBYs all throughout Vienna, Like everyone's like, oh, social housing, it's amazing. And I'm a big fan of social housing. But social housing doesn't automatically give the elixir that eliminates NIMBYism. There's NIMBYs in Japan. It's just a different approach of how you get there. And so some of the things I think that will help you guys, even if you change nothing, right, is, as I mentioned earlier, is can you get your permitting times as fast as you possibly can, right? Can you get there? And I'm here to tell you that, one city that was like uncle, like we're on the freaking Titanic and the band's about to stop playing because we're all gonna drown, is San Diego. And San Diego said, and their mayor said, hey, this is insane, right? They did some work on the front end. So about a year before Mayor Gloria did this, they started a very clear and transparent, not necessarily uncomplicated, or it's very complicated, but at the end of the day, they made it very clear what a total development project constitutes, right? So and they really started around PSH and TOD, and then what happened was things were still not being built fast enough, people were still acutely housing insecure, and homelessness was rampant. And so they said, you know what, we're gonna make it so that any housing development that is 120% of AMI or less, if you go through this process, right, and you submit a totally complete development application, we're going to approve your project in 30 days or less. And after a year, as of March of this year, they're averaging 9 days. They've had over 2,346, as of March, units delivered in that year. In that year, they're doing building code permits in 5 days. This seems like insanity to us in Colorado. And I get it, it's new, but it's amazing what you can do. And this is often attributed to Churchill, although I don't think it is, but I'll say it is, we Americans do the right thing after we've exhausted all other options. We're close to that with housing. And so, if we look at this and we say, maybe it's not 30 days in Inglewood, but maybe it's a target that you can get audacious on. You could Jim Collins it, and it could be a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, and you can get to a number that might work. And that number should be scary, because the scarier it is, the better you'll do. And so, if we look at that, then I put the link for you guys over here. I can share that more afterwards if you want to take a gander. And then, I think it's all about tools and trade-offs. Tools and trade-offs. And so your code next has some really interesting things in there. Some of it is revenue generating. Taxes are difficult. Folks are already struggling. But those are tools that you could deploy. You could deploy a sales tax. Sales tax are regressive. You could, again, you could ask yourselves if this is the right thing to do. Bring in more revenue, take greater control of your destiny. I'm not saying that that's politically palatable. I'm just saying it's an option. You could also work with Lindsay, and I know that's all throughout the elements, and you have Lindsay's a wonderful leader. I get to collaborate with Lindsay on the Colorado scale and national scale. And how can we continue to have a joint partnership of investment? One of the things we're doing at Maker is getting accredited. And so S&P is in the process of rating us now so that we can start to issue general obligation bonds against our future net position, which essentially allows us to create our own debt, right? Which allows us to issue the debt to our projects and then pay the interest back to ourselves. It's like a 401k loan, right, that you pay to yourself. Right now, at the size of your housing authority, you're not quite there, but you could create maybe a 5 or 10 year plan that could help you walk towards that path. That could be an option, and that has no impact on your taxpayers. You have the IHO. For me, I have an issue with IHOs because there's over 580 as of last research a year or so back of local governments who deploy IHOs. I feel like it's the wrong medicine for a misdiagnosed cause, right? Again, it goes back to negative externalities, right? Because everything goes through zoned capacity and permitting times. Everything goes through zone capacity and permitting times. And inclusionary housing ordinances tend to economically segregate individuals, right? All the renters live there and all the homeowners live there. That might not be exactly your condition, but it is common across America. And what happens is when you don't live near other people, you start to be afraid of them. And when you're afraid of them, you dehumanize them. And when you dehumanize them, bad things happen. just last night, I was at a meeting where we're doing a project where it's a ton of 70% AMI units in an area of opportunity right at a light rail station. People were yelling and screaming at me, as they've yelled and screamed at you, I'm sure, and said that, these people are going to assault us, these people are going to, lessen the quality of our lives. And this is decades of economic segregation, where if you don't go to a school with a kid who's a renter, I mean, you might have seen the video from a few years back. I hate using the word Section 8 because it's a slur, right? And so there's that terrible video of a young black couple, they're at a community pool, it's where they live, they have a friend, and they're like, you're the Section 8ers, and it blew up. And so, America is a melting pot, and our original sin still presents itself in our land use codes. I know it's difficult to hear, but at the end of the day, inclusionary housing ordinances do nothing in the current zoned capacity paradigm to help desegregate our communities so we live together and we don't look at one class of individuals and their housing type and judge them as being less than others. And so there are some new tools, and those new tools are things that you know about. Those new tools are cool, they're ready. I'm the chair of the Middle Income Housing Authority. It really is social housing. It's middle income housing. Some deeply affordable folks think we shouldn't exist. A lot of people that I respect, I disagree with them. It comes back to housing abundance. Plus, the Middle Income Housing Authority can partner with you to produce municipal bonds that you may not have access to otherwise, that I think would be great. Plus, you could partner with your housing authority. The housing authority could issue private project-based vouchers to drive deeper affordability in those projects. The difference is the Middle Income Housing Authority retains ownership, right? And so that's the differentiator. That's the real unbelievable element of the Middle Income Housing Authority, which doesn't exist in any other state. We have to continue to invest in deeply affordable housing. This is not a siphoning mechanism. This is an abundance and plus. And I think that the Middle Income Housing Authority is going to be wildly successful in the years ahead as it starts to make headroads and we see the capital markets coming back to an interest rate environment that allows those middle income projects to pencil. And creates mixed income communities that I think is vital for thriving communities and social fabric. Proposition 123, you guys know about that, fast track permitting, increased zone capacity. There are a lot of things that are happening at HUD right now that is making it more feasible for offsite manufactured homes that you could look into. There's also a number of things happening at Fannie and Freddie of interest. That I would encourage you, if you haven't already, as a committee, taking a look at. But the reality is that all of these things are extremely competitive, and you may get one or two every couple of years. And so this is why I've been so, bullish again on light touch density to allow the market to help you as you start to prioritize the deeply affordable housing and the affordable housing that your housing needs analysis identifies as an acute need. And then concurrently in your middle income investments, which many of which can be served by the market if that zone capacity dynamic is increased. So here's some things that I think that you might not have heard that you might seem like pie in the sky, but one of the big things about our housing dilemma, and I call it a housing depression, is that we've been like, okay, home builders, housing developers are aliens, or they're the horde. They're going to hurt our communities, right? So we need to defend ourselves against them. But this idea out of Germany, and that is somewhat prevalent in Scandinavian countries, but primarily Vienna, Germany, is this idea called Bagrappen. And Bagrappen is literally community group-led development. And community group-led development is an interesting psychological tool. This will never be a scale driver for you, but what it could do is it could hack this idea that developers bad, and as such, no homes come, right? And what it says is, okay, you're a homeowner, generally you're middle income or you're upper middle income, especially in these infill communities, which is like, you know what, we would like to develop our own home, right? We want to redevelop our home. You increase that zone capacity and you can now put 4 homes where you used to put 1. And maybe 2 individuals come together, they buy 2 lots together, they buy 1 lot together, and they develop the home themselves. They're the developer, right? They have their architect. In Germany, their local government has an office of community group-led development, right? Because what happens is it's like, wait a minute, those developers are actually us. We are the home builder, right? And you might think that this is pie in the sky, but this is proliferating throughout Germany, and it's really been around for about the last 30 years, but it's also an incubation lab opportunity for you, because you could ask that, you could have a competition, an RFP, if you have owned land, and I know that's something you don't have much of, but what you could say is, again, it's not us versus developers, we are the home builders, and we want to help promulgate an environment where innovation can thrive. You could require a community garden that's open to the public, which is what they do in Germany. You could test new building codes at these sites if you want to get to, passive house is another. And so you could say, okay, we're going to do a demonstration project with the housing authority, and the housing authority will have an IGA with the city so that if we don't, as we're doing this, we don't have to replicate it with every private developer. These are all things, again, we're not innovating in housing. These are some of the areas that you can innovate in ways that might not seem feasible at the moment in time. And so, and that goes into, design build competitions. I'm lucky enough, we're doing a design competition for single stair. I know City Council with Michael Ice and a good buddy of mine, he spoke to you, I think, a year or so back. Single stair now is the national kind of rage. It's been adopted in 7 states. It failed here in Colorado as it's very new. Folks are concerned about safety, although the data demonstrates that they're very safe, equal to or greater than our double-loaded corridors with long transom times. But, again, perhaps you can tack into that, partner with an innovative developer. Chelsea. Sure. Yeah, so single stair, so right now, essentially our building code, anything over 3 stories in Colorado and most localities is you have to have 2 egresses. You have to have 2 stairs and 2 points of egress. And so that's why most of our apartments are hotels, right? And so, I found this, and Corey and I talked on this a year or so back, but, a young woman of color, a black woman was like, we're being warehoused. These units are long and narrow, and they don't fit my family, and it's not okay. And I was like, and then I, started researching social housing and housing throughout the rest of the world. And what it does is double-loaded corridors constrain what we can do from a constructability, the lot sizes that we're developing, and it turns into the bread boxes, the 5/1s, the stuff that people really don't like. Folks don't like these really big buildings, especially as you start to do infill, right? And so, a single stair lets you have units that open up to 1 stair with generally an elevator, and you have very short transom times to leave your stair. They're pressurized, they're extremely safe, although fire departments are terrified of them. They're terrified of them. Some of them that are lukewarm on them don't have apparatuses to be able to, kind of help people off balconies and God forbid something happen like that. But those are things we could address. And what we're seeing, Seattle allows this, Honolulu allows this, Manhattan allows this, and now, Virginia just passed a study bill. Washington State just passed a study bill. There's lots of momentum, as I mentioned, 7 states. And so what it does is it allows you to create family-style units. And if we can get to condo defects reform, we can start to sell these to people that are family-sized, right? They have great solar orientation. Right now, unless you win the lottery in a double-loaded corridor, and you have some wonderful ones right here as I was walking by, you only have windows that face one way, and your units are very narrow and very deep, very different than most of the homes that we built throughout single-family homes. And so you can't heat up, you can't open up 2 windows and have a cross breeze, right? You can't have, the types of unit designs that, frankly, the rest of the world has. And what happens is when we go traveling to other places and we see these buildings, or we go to places like DC, where they used to have a single stair bill, and you go into, on DuPont Circle, all those buildings, all those, some call them robber barons, all of those homes were single stair buildings, right? And it creates a far better floor plan, has a tight envelope so you can have greater energy efficiency and passive house at a lower price. And I think they're absolutely drop dead gorgeous. But again, housing and architecture is in the eye of the beholder. It allows you to unlock small lots in ways that we can't now, and it allows that gentle density zoning capacity dynamics that we've discussed, create units and homes that I believe Coloradans will become more appreciative of and then demand. It will not replace double-loaded corridors like our LIHTC buildings, like our large apartment buildings. We still need them. They're great. But they don't meet everybody's needs, and it's really difficult as your family dynamic grows to stay in those homes, right? And so we see a lot of anxiety and angst and pressure there, both from folks who don't like the design standard, and it influences where developers build, right? So now we have to have larger sites, we have to build larger massing of units, which create a lot of issues. Plus, they're more expensive once you turn the lights on and open the door. You have to heat and cool. Not only do you have to pay for those corridors, you have to heat and cool them as well. And so take a look at that. I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised. The safety stuff you're going to have to traverse and will be difficult. We're working on a bill that will hopefully be reintroduced next year that will have deep engagement with our fire professionals who have legitimate concerns that need to be addressed, and hopefully we can get them to a point where they feel a bit more comfortable. Okay, I said this earlier, but I believe that affordable housing is essential to our national security and the pursuit of happiness. It's essentially the foundation of our nation's well-being and security. And I also thought I'd leave with a little bit of brevity, which is everyone wants housing to be affordable. The problem is all the darn units it requires to deliver it. And so anyone who's ever sat on the dais understands exactly what this means. And so hopefully I'm leaving you with some good questions that you can chew on. I admire the work you're doing. I know that there's no safe harbor in this work. I know that it is extremely difficult. Everyone has a different opinion, and most of us want unicorns to materialize out of thin air, but I'm here to tell you the unicorns are within each and every one of you. You have the answers. It's about trade-offs. So. Yeah, I think we have another 10 minutes, right, or 15 minutes or so. Yeah, Sherry.
I have a question on the Middle Income Housing Authority. You said they maintain ownership of properties through the municipal bonds that they offer. They offer municipal bonds and then maintain ownership. Is that through like a land trust model, or how do they?
So we actually have an ownership interest. It's a turnkey model, essentially, kind of like student housing. So a developer would develop it, but it's just like a local housing authority, but at a state level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we could, right now, by state statute, it's not the same like special limited partnership 0.01 kind of ownership structure. It's more along the lines of, okay, here's the benefits. You get a developer fee. You can produce this asset like a merchant builder, right? Which has a pretty significant percentage of the overall built product in our country. And so it's brand new. We haven't had a new project built yet. We've got 3 that are pretty viable. We're hoping with the interest rate environment change, and we just passed a new middle income housing tax credit that is about $5 million next year, and then it will be $10 million for the next 4 years. And we're thinking there's going to be some interest there through that vehicle to be able to get the buildings built.
I have one more question on your paper that you wrote on the decline of condo development in Colorado. You talked about the Middle Income Housing Authority maintaining liability for some of these developers that are building condos. Is that something that got kicked off when the bill didn't pass, or is that something you guys are still exploring as well?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. So, the Singaporeans, and Singapore does things that I'm not a fan of, like restrict civil liberties, segregate, married folks from, you can't buy a public housing unit in Singapore. But, what's interesting is Singapore, when once they left British colonial rule and they're kind of moving, they were studying everybody's different housing strategies across the world, and they were like, the Americans did everything right, except they didn't sell the public housing units to their residents. And so, like Singaporeans, right, like are extremely equity rich. They don't have a lot of cash, and the average public housing unit for sale, because they sell their unit. So in Singapore, essentially the government, their housing authority, which is a state entity, essentially to use nomenclature that we're familiar with, they're the HOA. They own the envelope, right? And they own the dirt, but then Singaporeans buy the asset. And many of them, the average public housing for sale in Singapore is like $1 million. It's not cheap. But they also have a 401k vehicle that they provide for folks to help buy that, and they have dual generation ownership. So what I proposed is, what a great way for us to be able to learn from what we failed at with public housing, right? Which we've now privatized through the rental assistance demonstration program, and say this could be a true equity and opportunity for social housing. So we need a slight change in the statute, and I believe that we might introduce that next session. It just wasn't, it was a little too early last year. So the idea is could we sell condos to middle-income Coloradans, and could we, with our limited governmental immunity, help stave off the incessant defects? Because really right now, when we build rental product, we have issues, but there's no profit motive for us to sue each other. And so we go into liquidated damages. And so basically where I'm going with this is that I believe that the Middle Income Housing Authority and its power is to not only create publicly owned rental product in the middle income, but to also then promulgate the development and sale of condos to individuals. The Middle Income Housing Authority would help with the HOA to ensure that there's no unforeseen special assessment fees, because it's difficult for HOAs to be able to put the money away. And so I think that it could allow us to get more towards what we admire in places like Singapore, and also what we see in some instances in places like Vienna. Thank you.
You almost like create like the HOA president could be like the middle.
Yeah.
Like it will make it easy for you guys to be successful in this
Exactly,
process.
exactly. And then we, when we get sued, we have some governmental limited immunity, and we have to defend that. But and depending on how things go, we could either maintain ownership of the land in perpetuity, or we, after the statute of limitations and repose, we could hand that over to the HOA, and it would be owned by the individuals within it.
Just as a question specific on the apartments and condos, obviously the last decade, a lot of apartments have been built to a condo map where a developer says like, oh, in 8 years from now, I can sell it as condos. Why do you think that you haven't seen more of that happen today?
Yeah, I think, a lot of our, product that would be, I believe, that's mapped and condominiumized has stopped being condominiumized because folks have just decided to move into the rental segment. I also think that when you condominiumize, you open up the clock to being sued. And so, if you're not going to sell that product on the front end, once you condominiumize it and you start to sell it, and
That's when the 8-year clock starts. Correct. It's not like we built it, we waited 8 years, and now we're condoing it.
Yeah, the trial bar is too smart to let that happen.
Interesting. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's not a lot of incentives in the marketplace.
One more, in talking specifically on Englewood and showing the graphic of 63% of our land is single family, 1-unit housing, and how changing zoning to allow more density can help. What are your thoughts on the cottage zoning?
I love it. I love it. Cottage zoning, Paseo courts, if you can put 3 modest homes where 1 modest home was, or now not modest, and you can sell those homes for 400, 500, 600K, whereas now maybe they're just like, if we're up the road in Denver, you scrape them and you put 2 McMansions where 1 McMansion used to stand, like Denver has a lot. There's not enough critique of Denver's land use patterns and how much they tax their residents. And so, all product, as Hugo, is expensive. It's expensive to deliver, even at moderate prices. But the more that you bring in on that, right, the greater ability for folks to be able to move through the continuum. And so I think cottage homes are beautiful. I think that there could be design standards that Englewood institutes to ensure that the aesthetics and the life and safety elements are where they need to be. And I think that when you look at them, they're extremely desired. You'll see them in Dwell Magazine, you'll see them in Architectural Digest, they're gorgeous. It's just really, again, neighbors are hopping mad and they're scared as hell and they don't want things to change. And so, that's part of the challenge here. But I'm a huge fan of cottage homes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Looking at the zoning items that you brought up, as you know, last year when we were doing our code revisions, we looked at doing exactly what you're recommending tonight. We looked at up to 4 units on a single-family lot, if it met certain AMI standards. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I heard from citizens during that conversation and during exploring that policy was, well, no one else is doing this. Why do we have to go first? Why isn't Denver doing this? Why isn't Aurora doing this?
Well, we go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
I'll use that next time. But, you know, this feeling of we're a small city, we don't have as much infrastructure or resources, bigger cities, and if we pass this first, all the development will be flooded into Inglewood, and we will bear a disproportionate cost in the metro when this is a metro-wide challenge, right? You know, the cost of housing doesn't stop at Yale for us. And so,
Sure.
you know, one of the things that you have long advocated for in the last few years has been regionalization and how do we make this more efficient? And so I know there's a hotly contested conversation around should there be a state mandate or a local control state, but what would you encourage us to be thinking about when it comes to regionalization? And how do we balance, like, who has to go first?
Maybe you sue Denver for disparate impact.
Write that one down.
I'm not kidding. Denver is crushing you guys. They're pushing all their demand to you and others. You know, look, I mean, Denver, you know, is staunchly progressive, but with their land use, and they're staunchly progressive in their taxation strategies. They are extreme laggards when it comes to sister competitor cities like Minneapolis, like Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City doesn't have a massive upzoning strategy, but Minneapolis does. And Fort Collins, and again, I mentioned Mayor Arndt, you know, she's got the scars to prove it, as you guys do too. But this is coming. The future of housing is in the sky. Depending on when we get there and how much pain our dear constituents experience waiting for it is the question. And, you know, hope is not a strategy. We could wait and pray that the legislature, you know, upzones these areas. But, you know, I believe, right, that we need greater economies of scale, as we discussed. I also think that if local governments, with the support of their constituents, and again, it's difficult, and this is a winner-takes-all system, right? You can win by 1 vote, or you can win by 1 million. You're still going to govern, all right? Hopefully with a mandate for everyone, even if they didn't vote for you. But eventually, we will be on the Titanic. It depends on whether or not you consider you're on it right now.
Do you know of any other examples where municipalities have partnered on creating some sort of uniformities within their codes? For example, we have a really strong relationship with Sheridan and Littleton, but even, you know, broaching the topic of land use is incredibly fraught, much less with different constituencies and different electeds. Are there any examples of multi-city kind of compacts that you're aware of?
No. No, that's why we've seen the proliferation of statewide intervention across the country. You know, and look, I think, you know, local governance is the most effective form of governance. It hasn't proven to be so when it comes to housing in this dynamic. You're not alone. It should be regional. You are being harmed by Denver. Denver's the same. I mean, Denver's 23% of their land, residentially zoned land for multifamily. And, you know, Denver's like, you know, it's eventually we're going to be in a position where there's no other options, and we will do this, and we'll be like, wait a minute, it's not that bad. Now we got to pay for these things. I'm not disparaging that, but when we prioritize something as Americans, we do it the best, you know, and watch out when we get serious, right? Like, this is the same thing as we've seen. And so I think that at the end of the day, the federal government needs to do a hell of a lot more too. And that's a lot of my folks and friends are like, well, we're a federalist system, and this is really only a state issue. Hogwash. We're starting to see more of it now. I mean, essentially, we talked about this, Chelsea, but when you read the research, right, essentially, it wasn't called the Defense Production Act at the time, but essentially it was the precursor to the Defense Production Act. They were, you know, the federal government was stockpiling commodities for housing use. How many folks in this room know that Congress has issued a federal housing emergency declaration? Most people don't know that. I didn't know that until I started researching it. 1946, right? Again, coming out of the Great War, what are we going to do? We did a lot of things right. We did the most important thing wrong. We did not allow every American to benefit from the bounty. And so we segregated people of color from that. But a lot of those same interventions work, right? We allowed the Levittown dynamic to happen. We were able to standardize a number of things. And so I think that, as you talk with the local governments, perhaps, right, and we saw this during COVID, we did amazing things for one another during COVID. We did things that probably we never perceived as possible in collaboration with other local governments because we had no other option, right? And so at the end of the day, I think that, I think that's what we recommended, Evelyn and I did, which was like, hey, if you have an ADU code, or if you get your Prop 123 fast track at 90 days, maybe you have the same fast track process and you share that with Littleton, and Littleton shares it with you, and you guys can have some cost saving, and dynamics of that note. But as we know, right, like the public comment hearing throws a significant wrench in the most logic-based plans.
One more question, please.
Thanks for the time, for the information. You mentioned that you thought that we had done inclusionary housing. Littleton has, we have not.
No, I know.
Oh, okay, got it. But
I know it was recommended in
right, it was recommended, right. But in your critique about segregation and how that can lead to that, I was in Longmont when they did away with it in 2013, and then when they brought it back in 2019. And they were very intentional about how they, made sure there wasn't kind of this clumping effect or clustering effect of, affordable low-income housing, in different parts of the community by putting that in the regulations themselves. Have you seen, cities that have done that well? I don't know how it's worked.
Yeah.
I haven't really followed it since then.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, to me, if the citizen, if you feel that's the best, I was more of a fan earlier in my career of IHOs. But as I've started to realize the psychological impact of saying to people that this housing's bad and we need to tax that housing to pay for other housing, I mean, all empirical economic research is built upon the fact that taxes rise the cost of the good that you're taxing. You tax that good to limit the negativity that it provides. Now, that's not to say that if you're building a McMansion and you can afford and there's a desire for this, but just know that there's no evidence to suggest that it reduces the cost of housing for either affordable housing or market rate housing. And so if you do it, you have to go into it knowing that you have to offset those headwinds in other ways. And generally, the difficult ways are the zoning elements, right? And so I do know that Portland, Oregon and Portland, Maine have IHOs, and Minneapolis does as well, Minnesota and Minneapolis. But what we're seeing is that developers are canny, right? Home builders are canny, and what happens is they go to the localities that have the least impact on their gross margin, because gross margins in home building are very thin. And so I'm not to say don't do it. I'm just to say that I feel like people think that it does no harm, but there's no evidence to suggest that that's the truth. But there are models that you could look at that I think are the best of the best. And if that's the road you're going down, and you can do that, and I won't be too harsh on you. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, goodness, very nice to meet you. Okay, so let's have just a by the way, there's Peter's, I'm going to leave this up for just a second. That's his contact. Peter, I assume if you put it on a slideshow? Yeah, okay, thank you. So I want to give us an opportunity to reflect on some of the ideas and concepts that Peter has just shared. The questions is really, what opportunities do you see for utilizing some of those ideas? We talked about a lot of different things, and I'd love for you to think about it Obviously in terms of how Inglewood, but also how that might inform a set of recommendations. Like, what would you focus on? When he first started, he talked about the importance of this trade-off conversation. So it's going to be, that's going to be the tricky part as we navigate this conversation of the co-creation of the recommendations. I think there are two challenges. The first is, what altitude should we be at in terms of those recommendations, meaning how concrete, how much specificity should they have? And then also, how do you navigate those trade-offs, assuming that you align to some of the ideas that he presented? And what actions do you recommend? So what are the opportunities and what actions do you recommend? We're going to do a little different than the last couple of times where we've had you reflect on your own and then pair up and then get into foursomes. I'm just going to make it really simple this time, given our time. So we're just going to group up in threes. So just Corey, Sean, Sherry. This is Samantha or Sam? Sam, Sophia, Hugo, Kevin. Kevin, are you on your own? Did they leave? When they come back, you're going to pair up with Chelsea and Brad. I think they're just saying goodbye to Peter.
Only committee members.
Oh, really?
Myself, Sean, Brad, me.
Even in the discussion?
Yeah. Not influence.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that reminder.
The ladies over here, and it'll be just.
Thank you. So, so thank you for that. So we'll do Sherry, Corey, Sam, Sophia, Hugo, Kevin, and then Diane and Amber. So I'm going to give you just about 10 minutes to have a conversation in your small group, and then we'll spend a few minutes reporting out. All right. Let's hear from, is it Amanda? Amanda. Is it Amanda? Amanda? Amanda, yeah. Here we go, Amanda. Amanda is my partner. By the next session, I will all be all healed. I'll be able to write and run over here. And, all right, I'm just, in the interest of time, we're just gonna go around this way. So let's hear from this group right here. These three, yep. So let's have you. All right. Thank you.
I really liked one slide that he showed of just kind of conceptually figuring out how to do this, and that was the pathways, tools, and trade-offs. And so when you're thinking about ideas, thinking about it in that way, what are the pathways we want to get to? What, housing needs do we want to address? And then what are the tools within that pathway and trade-offs we're willing to make within that pathway to achieve that? Because I think what that shows is there's multiple tools, multiple trade-offs, things like that that need it to happen. And each project might not fit each of those boxes. So they might, if there's 5 tools, they might only need 2 or 3, or, 2 of them don't work. And so there's kind of a toolbox that allows them to do that. And then one idea we had was kind of taking that, what was it, the community, sorry.
The German word?
No, the other thing.
The other thing.
The design
Oh,
competition.
the design competition.
Yeah, design competition,
Yeah.
but really kind of building out, based on maybe what are the top 3 housing needs in Inglewood, and building out those pathways. So if we want to address this housing need, let's have a little design competition or a little session of ideas that we can do to do that on a specific site. So whether that's home ownership, small scale, or affordable rentals, things like that.
Wonderful. Sherry, anything?
I like the idea of maybe focusing on like a tri-city land use committee as well, because we have a tri-city homelessness committee. We have several initiatives with the other municipalities in the area. So that's one way maybe we could be innovative, is to try to collaborate, especially since we have such vastly different demographics as Littleton and Sheridan. We're kind of in the middle. I think it could be a good way to collaborate with somebody who has ideas but no money, and somebody who has money but really is restrictive on ideas sometimes, and maybe we could be that middle ground. I don't know.
Right. Thank you. Sam, you want to add anything?
There we go. I'll keep it short for the other groups, but we were also talking about fast track permitting, basically, and how that's really great low-hanging fruit for Inglewood.
Very great. Thank you. Can we give it up for this group, please? Thank you, group 1. Please.
I think we kind of revisited the conversation about continuing the work of Code Next and loosening some of the current zoning requirements that we have, and I think that's definitely worth revisiting. And then what Sam said, basically make it fast and see ways that we can fast track affordable projects. And those were kind of the 2 big takeaways I got from that could be applicable.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. Anything to add?
Not really. I mean, we talked about a lot of the solutions are expensive ones, and it was cool on his tool slide where there's a lot of maybe more or less free tools of you could be doing this that maybe doesn't cost your city a lot of money but can provide a path, something that as simple as maybe hiring another planner specific to this to fast track permitting. Or I mentioned it earlier, we have a community development, but how do we have a community development person just for these kind of projects? And I mean, literally, if you could get one project done a year, that person's job is well worth it. Especially connecting the dots of public funds that are out there and how to access them and use them and be a resource that can help streamline and bring more of these to the area that doesn't necessarily require us to put up capital besides for staff or
Right,
people.
right. Thank you, Hugo. Kevin?
Regulations, government regulations on building codes, fast tracking, I do like that, fast tracking, getting the process moving forward. I believe there's too many regulations. There's also a lot of asphalt in the city that could be utilized. And I believe that if we started to pay attention and focus on this asphalt and start to find developers that are willing to work on this asphalt and build in these spots, we could possibly add to Inglewood and give some more homes.
Very great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can we? Yay?
You want to start?
Our small but mighty group 3, which is
I agree
really
with
2.
everything that everyone has said.
You know, the other piece that one of my takeaways was, and it's going to hurt, and everyone's going to have to compromise.
Yeah.
But we just need to do it. We need to like stop dragging our feet and just like, we have to do it, you know, and something that we got on the conversation of was the like the cottage zoning and how that's just such a wonderful opportunity for so many reasons, especially because then it gives an affordable option that's not just an apartment, you know, like something that's, you know, better and nicer. And something else that I like that he brought up was that other committee he's on, the affordable middle income housing. I don't know, I was looking things up on the website, and something I like about that committee is it includes people up to like 140% AMI, which I think was kind of interesting because I think when we talked, we only talked up to 120. But like really, like if you look at every, you know, our market and economy and everything, like including possibly up to 140 might be something we might want to consider. You know, because something that we talked about was how a lot of her employees who are like nurses and physical therapists also can't afford, and we know that they're not making under 120.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Thank you so much, Amber. All right. So, I'm going to close this out, and then, as always, I would invite you, please, I wish, I wonder, what are the colors? Green is I like, orange is I wish, and blue is I wonder. But before you do that, just some closing things. So, first of all, I want you to consider that while this sort of process of formulating the recommendations to City Council may be a little messy, what I'm walking away with today is that you all actually have a lot of shared, first of all, you've shared understanding now of what the problem is and some of the solutions. And likely, there's a lot more that you can agree upon. And it's always those small little things that become the sort of sticky piece. And that is so normal. That is so normal. So as we go into this next phase of the work, expect it to be messy, and that's okay. When we continue to push through, we'll get on the other side and we'll get to alignment on a set of recommendations. Where's my little thingy? So September is all about how do we make sense of the 9 months that we've been together? How do we make sense of all of that? So we'll be sending out a synopsis. First of all, you're going to have kind of a hefty packet of pre-work. We'll be sending out the synopsis so you can take a look at that. But then we're going to be having a conversation about how is it that we make sense of all this. October, November is really about just drafting the set of recommendations. And then December is about finalizing and alignment. So in September, we're actually going to have a conversation about what does alignment mean? What does that look like? Can you disagree and still align? So can you disagree and still align? We ask that you refamiliarize yourself with the root policy assessment. That's where we started, and that's been a theme. So revisit that before, that's important. That was like your landscape analysis. It's super important to this work. And then the last thing is we invited you, Nancy has sent out a couple of times a survey that asked the question, what remains unanswered or unclear for you that if it's not addressed, it would be a barrier to you beginning work on shaping those recommendations? Does that make sense? All right, very great. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure. I can't wait to dig in with this work with you in September. For those going on summer vacation, enjoy. Sorry? I have to look because I've only done this once.